started this, but I loved his background. Look at the color coordination.
I know. I tried to make it match my eyes
Oh,
and
very
match
good.
the theme of my books, because it's also sort of blue. So we're working all together.
Yeah, I didn't plan it, but I love it. I love it. You know, I'm a color coordinated person. So I guess let's just go ahead and jump right in. I like to just, you know, we're prepared. So let's go ahead and dive into the questions. And the first one I had lined up.
One moment, my cat wants to make itself known. It's rubbing against the
let's please have a cat introduction.
It's rubbing against the tripod. This is Portia.
Hi.
And if the camera falls down, it's because of her. Okay, it's not my fault, it's her fault.
We both have animal supervisors today. So if someone's tripod falls, blame the supervisors, because it's not our fault. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. That's
awesome. Bonus cat video. We didn't hear you that. I like it. So I guess, how do you describe this practice to people who have never heard of Wim Hof or read your book? I mean, people must hear the word cold exposure and just have a million questions. I never know how to explain it to people when I talk about it. So how do you usually explain it?
So what we're doing is trying to put ourselves in an environmentally stressful environment, and then so something that sort of shocks your nervous system, and then you're trying to control your responses to that. And the reason why this is important is because we evolved as you know, great apes on the plains of the African savanna, you know, a hell of a long time ago, like 500,000 years ago. Our ancestors are running around this area, which is stressful. Like, we're having huge temperature variations, you're running from predators, you're fighting off diseases that we can't even imagine right now, and as humans have evolved and gained all sorts of technical mastery, our lifestyles have gotten way better than those guys.
Yeah, absolutely.
But the stresses that we evolved with, which were constants, are no longer there. And what this does is, because we live in this pretty comfortable environment, you know, we have nice large sweaters, and like we have thermostats that you can turn on in your house to keep you at essentially like 70 degrees all the time in this eternal comfort place. Because we're so narrow in our range now, our bodies sort of get bored and sick and turn against themselves. And so what Doesn't Kill Us is about, you know, this is this book, What Doesn't Kill Us. I have another book coming out pretty soon in April. But what this is about is trying to find stresses that make sense from an environmental perspective. Like, how do we put stress back in our life in a way that helps our bodies become more resilient and lets us go out into difficult environments and find that they're not that bad, actually.
Yeah, that we may be designed to handle that, and by making ourselves a little uncomfortable, we can benefit ourselves in ways that we've forgotten. So let's rewind the clock a little bit and talk about what first led you to even investigate this. I mean, you were working on a different book called The Enlightenment Trap. So what led you from that to even wanting to research Wim Hof and his methods?
So yeah, I'm an investigative journalist, which means I started off working mostly out of India, doing stuff, you know, pretty hardcore investigations. My first book was on organ trafficking. I've worked in war zones. I've done things that are pretty, you know, in-depth, dangerous sort of investigations over the years. And the book that I was writing right when I met Wim Hof was called The Enlightenment Trap, and it was about essentially how meditation can kill you, and how, like, when you get really intensely involved in meditation, this and especially people who are looking for enlightenment or for some sort of like superpower, like levitation or walking through walls and this sort of stuff, people go crazy and bad things can happen to them. So that book was, I was following the story of a student of mine who died in India years and years ago, and how I had to bring her body back to America. It was a really traumatic and difficult thing. And I found many, many cases of people searching for this sort of transcendent experience, and then where things go really, really poorly for them. Now, fast forward to, I'm pretty well known for doing this sort of research, And I hear about this guy named Wim Hof in 2010. This is at this point, Wim is not the international superstar that he is now.
Yeah.
He was pretty much unknown. He was sort of a clown on the international market. Like, look at this guy doing freaky things in the ice. But I heard that he was trying to come up with a training program that can teach anyone to be superhuman, to live in the ice, to control their immune system consciously. Like, these things sounded batty to me. So I flew out
crazy,
to him.
right?
Totally crazy. So I flew out to see him on a commission from Playboy magazine, and because I'm an immersive journalist, because I'm someone who actually tries to put myself in those situations,
right.
I had the choice if I could just watch him from sort of the background and just sort of see how it goes, or I could, try his training program and just watch it fall apart around me.
Which is the goal, right? You wanted to disprove it. Right,
exactly. But it turns out that instead of it falling apart, I do his breathing method, which is, it's one of his techniques, and I find that doing it, I'm able to have this sort of super burst of endurance where normally at that point I could do about like 20 push-ups, and I do his breathing method for like 30 minutes, and all of a sudden I'm holding my breath on an exhale, and I did 40 push-ups in a matter of a minute or something, and it was super, super easy. I was like, this is interesting.
Yeah,
and then,
didn't expect that.
Not at all. And then I do this other thing that he does, which is immerse you in ice water. So we walk out to a pond near his place. I immerse myself in ice water, and very, very quickly I learned that I can control my body temperature in this environment. So my first reaction is, of course, horror at the idea of being in like very, very cold water. And then in the method, you just learn to relax in that situation. You say, okay, this is stress. This is really, there's a lot of sensation here, but I get to choose what that sensation means. I get to choose whether that is going to kill me or if it's something that I can manage. And you learn to manage it like extremely quickly because our bodies are evolved to adapt and not be like, okay, I give up, I'm going to go die.
So that's what first interested me in your book, really, and the whole method, and that's why I chose your book, because it's so widely lauded as being the best one to read before you decide to try it, is because I was interested in not just the physical benefits, but the mental. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but the mental benefits, like could you take something uncomfortable or even painful and just decide to be okay in that? So it's something that really interested me. But yeah, so you found yourself in Poland, and you've met the Iceman, as he is so affectionately termed, and you're standing in front of this guy who has done just crazy things, and I have some of them listed here. He's run half a marathon above the Arctic Circle in bare feet and shorts, climbed some of the world's highest mountains shirtless and shoeless, which you did with him, and swam underneath ice.
He actually did it with shoes. He did that with shoes. He did that with shoes. Yeah.
That's good to know. And you wanted to prove him wrong. You went on this journey. You decided to dive in, try it, and you were kind of proven wrong a little bit.
Right. Which is great. To be able to go into it as a journalist and look at the facts. Because so many of us have made up our minds about things. Right? Like we all think we know what is right, and I thought I knew what was right. But when the rubber hits the road, when you're actually doing something, that's when things matter. And I learned that I could do the exact same things as Wim, and it doesn't take long to learn. It took me like 3 days to learn. And by the end of a week training, I was climbing up a mountain in Poland, wearing just basically a bathing suit and hiking boots. And it was it was 2 degrees Fahrenheit, so negative 15 Celsius. And I was on the mountain for 8 hours, and I was warm. I was warm the whole time. And this was like this eye-opening experience where like, I have to do something about this. I have to go investigate this more because it's awesome. It's really, really cool.
It's great. Yeah, it's so unexpected, which is part of the beauty of it. Yeah.
Yes, yeah, and so in the book, you were basically following my journey from skeptic to, I don't want to say believer because it works. Like, it's not like I believe it works. It's like,
Yeah.
no, I'm actually on the
Yeah.
top of the mountain in a bathing suit works.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction, I think. That's really interesting. So the whole experience certainly starts with Wim Hof, and I do think people start reading your book because of that interest in him. Usually that's at least what happened for me, and I do think that's important. But what I also loved about your book, What Doesn't Kill Us, is that you took it to the next level in the sense of you were like, okay, well, where else can I take this, and what does it mean on a scale grander than just what Wim Hof is saying?
Right.
So you began to investigate the loss of these biologically inherent skills, which the human species in the midst of our modern lives seems to be just kind of pushing to the wayside. So how has constant comfort in today's world affected the health and power of our bodies? I know we talked about this a little bit earlier, but can you expand on that at all?
I mean, when you think about what comfort is, like, is it a place you get to and then you're perfectly there all the time?
Yeah.
Or is comfort a relationship between you and the outside world? And in my experience, it's not like I can find a comfortable sofa and be like, this sofa is the perfect thing ever, right? But you know, you sit in that sofa long enough, and eventually you start getting achy, and you're like, oh, I need a better sofa, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to find the better thing, and what comfort actually is a tension between stress and release. It's a tension between finding that you know, you're only comfortable after you've like done something stressful, and it's the release from that stress where you're like, oh, this is great. So if our philosophy, and this is a very Western idea, is to insulate ourselves from the things that make us uncomfortable, what happens is we narrow our world into like an increasingly a small little thing, and we're like this, and we can't get out because we don't have range anymore. So what the Wim Hof method does, and all of these other things that I've been studying since Wim, is to find things that make us uncomfortable in order to find ways to be comfortable in every, or at least many, environments, right? I can't jump into a volcano and be like, this is great, right? There are limits.
Yeah. But that makes perfect sense. I think that was a great explanation. So what other like people or groups did you find kind of experimenting with similar practices?
So with the Wim Hof method, let's see. So I've written 2 books now, and they get like confused in my head because there's a lot of overlap between them. So with Wim, I looked historically, and you know, honestly, Wim did not invent cold water, and he did not invent breathing methods. There have been people doing this stuff that go back to the yogis. The Spartans were doing this stuff. There are medieval monks who were doing this stuff. There was a huge movement in the 1920s in Germany and Russia for people exposing themselves into ice water. So it's not that Wim invented it. Wim just has a great package that's, you know, and he explains it in a very novel and interesting way. So in What Doesn't Kill Us, I hung out with the Army's environmental unit, so that the U.S. area, and they are like trying to make super soldiers, like people who can exist in any environment. So I hang out with them. I hang out with this amazing surfer, Laird Hamilton, who who has this method called XPT. It is it's another version of environmental training. And so this is like very important to think about, is that usually we think that health rests on two pillars, right? There's exercise and diet. It's the stuff you put into your body, and then how you move your body in order to use that fuel. And that's like the key to human health. That's what we often say. But there are other factors working us all the time. And what I lump Wim and these other people into this idea of environmental training. Put yourself in different environments, whether it's ice water or heat or a fearful situation, anything where the outside world is modulating your internal feelings, your internal state. This is a whole nother way to train. So you could be like the rippedest dude with the nicest six-pack, lifting the coolest weights, and then you go home and you're like, I have to just modulate my temperature gauge to be just right. And this is actually an indication of a lack of resilience, a lack of generalized robustness. And it leads to things like anxiety, it leads to depression, it leads to autoimmune illnesses. It wreaks havoc on your body. So
a lot of modern medical problems. Yeah.
yes, especially chronic ones. Acute problems like breaking your leg or like a bacterial infection, go to a Western doctor, get that worked on.
Get it figured out, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting for like people with chronic long-term, I mean, that's what interested me in it, is because I have IBS. So I was like, for the pain part, I'm like constantly looking for like, you know, how can I be comfortable being uncomfortable? And that was honestly like the first appeal to me, and just because I'm like self-competitive and I wanted to like experience it, if that makes sense. So
totally. How does it work for your IBS? Like how, so if you've been doing the training, how has that affected you?
I find the cold helps me, like the cold showers, so I don't have a lake to jump into, unfortunately, but I totally would love to try that one day. But I find that mentally, and this actually leads really well into the next question, but mentally it's like you're putting yourself at the end of your shower, just jumping into a cold shower, whatever it is, you get in and it's intentionally not fun, not pleasant. So it's kind of like I'm signaling that in my mind that we're not comfortable, and then I have to just stand there in it, try not to shiver, try not to react in any way, and it's almost meditational. And I think it helps me when I do, I mean, obviously pain is still there, but I think it helps me in my mind sort of just practice the ability to not register or not react in a way that I normally would. Does that make any sense at all?
It does, but you're still having symptoms of the IBS. Like the IBS hasn't like magically vanished, right? It's more like managing it for you.
Exactly right, yeah.
That's too bad, because some people who do this are like, yeah, my lupus went away. And it's like, it's so interesting to meet people like that. But I think a lot of people's experiences are more, so also akin to you. It's like, when you think about pain, where does pain happen? Like if I like whap my hand, or if I do this to my hands right now, where is that sensation? It's actually not in the hand, right? The hand transfers neural signals that go up through, through here, and then into the spinal cord and up through the brainstem. And pain actually registers in your brain instead of in your hand. And so there are ways, and Wim Hof method is one of them, to sort of intervene in the way you either transfer the signal from your hand to your head, or the way your head interprets that signal as either the worst thing in the world, something that gives you panic, anxiety, and it's uncontrollable, or it makes you something that you can deal with. Like, okay, I can manage this. It is too bad that you didn't have your IBS go away, because I remember meeting this guy with
point.
right. With like, I know people with Crohn's disease who were like pooping blood for like years. And they did this method, and like in like 3 weeks it was gone. I wish that we could just promise that every time, but I think that everyone has their own journey through health.
So true. Yeah. But I think that it's been a great practice, and I was doing so well over the summer, and then we went to Italy, and something about the vacation just like totally threw off my routine. So trying to get back into my routine is something I'm looking forward to, and I might do some sort of content on that featuring the Wim Hof method later this month.
Here's your moment.
Here's my moment.
Here's your moment. You needed a sign. Take a cold shower.
I know everyone watching this who hasn't done it, they're probably like, these people are crazy, but honestly, it's not that bad. And I kind of start to like it at the end. Like, I start to like having a cold shower. It's very interesting. But so in that same vein, so many people who take sort of a cursory glance at this, look at it as a purely physical thing, but by your own participation, you realize that part of it's also mental, which is kind of what we've been talking about the last few minutes. So can you explain the concept, which I love, of what you call the wedge?
Yeah. The wedge.
Look.
Coming April 14th or whenever. So the wedge is, so when I first started doing the Wim Hof method, I'm in Poland, and I'm trying to like conceive of what he's doing, because at that point Wim Hof's method was actually pretty much all over the place. Like it has changed a lot since I first learned from him. And I was like, well, what are we actually doing? And I saw it as as when you do his breathing method, which is essentially superventilating or hyperventilating, like breathing really fast, exhaling, and then holding your breath. That's essentially what it is. And when you do more and more reps, you're able to hold your breath on that exhale for longer and longer and longer periods of time. And in general, it's like the first round, you'll hold it for 1 minute. The next round, you'll hold it for 2 minutes. And then the next round after that, you're holding for 3 minutes. And, you know, results may vary.
Mine varied, like, even all the time. Even when I was doing it every day, it would be, some days I would be almost at 3 minutes every round. And some minutes I couldn't get past 1.5 minutes. But it does vary, and I think it depends on the person too. But I think it's important for people to realize, like, think about the last time you held your breath and how long you could do it just right now. I mean, you don't have to do it right now, but like, time yourself and then try it and see what the difference is.
So when we're doing this method, you know, you're extending this hold for a long period of time, and you get to this point where your autonomic system, all the automatic parts of your neural firings are saying, breathe, just breathe. And then you realize you have a choice here to be like, I'm not going to breathe yet. You know, it can be difficult, right? And there's a point where you really should breathe. Like, I'm not saying stop breathing, right? But you have this inflection point between where your gasp reflex starts to take over, and you have choice there. And I see this choice as the wedge you're putting in between stimulus and response. Like, you're literally creating space but where your consciousness comes in and where that automatic forcing you to breathe thing comes in. And it's the same wedge that you use when you're in the ice water. You jump into the ice water and your immediate reaction is to panic, right? That's the unmitigated response for people is just your nerves telling you, oh my God, this is the worst thing in the world. And you clench up and you breathe faster and it's bad. And what you're trying to do instead is say, no, all of that signal coming in, I can manage it and I can relax here. That is the wedge. So it's the opposite, right? So with you're trying to, is it the opposite? You're in both ways. You're trying to resist those sensations and sort of relax into it. And it's like adrenaline coming in here. You're like, no, adrenaline, don't come in. You chase it away. Trying
to control your body's natural reactions and having a little bit more of a control over that initial response, that you can take it in, hold it there, process it, let it go. And it's not like the sensation goes away, but it's about that sort of in between. I think you described it in your book as like the moment when you have to sneeze and you don't sneeze. It's like
that's the easiest way to think of it in a totally useless context, right? Which is like when a sneeze is coming on, you're like, and what is it that you do to stop sneezing? Like you focus on those sensations, like there's some thing in your brain.
Sensation goes away, but it's about that sort of in between. I think you described it in your book as like the moment when you have to sneeze and you don't sneeze. It's like
that's the easiest way to think of it in a totally useless context, right? Which is like when a sneeze is coming on, you're like, and what is it that you do to stop sneezing? Like you focus on those sensations, like there's some thing in your brain that you do that where you fight that and you can actually stop the sneeze from occurring. And now apply that to everything, right? Apply it to, you know, you can use this in the cold, you can use it in the heat, you can use it in fearful situations, you can use it in sex, you can use it in sleep, you can use it with auditory things. And so what I've been doing since hanging out with Wim for, you know, doing Wim's method for 10 years at this point.
That's so crazy. It's been that long, huh?
I know, I'm so old, right? I was young once.
We all were.
So it's finding other places to use this, and Wim Hof opened my eyes to that, but there is a whole world of these techniques. Some are already, you know, yoga, there's elements of this in yoga, there's elements of this in like Qigong, martial arts, sports, you know, like meditation, like it's everywhere. The wedge really is everywhere, but, you know, learning more to focus on sensations and then use those sensations, what's really interesting is that you start influencing the automatic parts of your body. You start influencing the parts that you didn't think you had control over. You know, one of the techniques that I love in the Wedge.
I'm so excited about it. I can't wait.
Is, you know, Wim is about cold. So I was like, oh, let's go do heat. And so I went to the indigenous sauna traditions in Latvia, which is, you know, sort of nearby Wim. And they have these like elaborate rituals where you can train yourself to endure heat for a really long period of time. So I did this 5-hour sauna at somewhere between 180 and 220 degrees. You know, sort of the temperatures going up and down, and I learned to control those responses in the heat, which also, interestingly, help with anxiety and depression too, just like the Wim Hof method. Except instead of working on the sympathetic nerves, which are the fight or flight response, heat is actually the parasympathetic nerves, which is the rest and digest responses. So you're working on the other end of the register in the heat. The other thing I've been doing, it looks super macho. If you go to like my Instagram, you can see it. It's throwing kettlebells, where you find a partner.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's great. And it looks, it's funny because it looks like it's built for Instagram. Like it's like two dudes squaring off with some big piece of metal, and we're throwing this thing. But it's not about that at all. What it's really is, and so what it looks like is I have a kettlebell, which is a piece of iron. It's like a cannonball with like a handle over the top. Two people face off, and then they swing the kettlebell, and they let go, and throw it, and the other person catches it, and they throw it back. And what's happening here, it is a workout. But what you're really doing is trying to develop trust with another person. You're trying to put yourself in an environment which can hurt you, which is the kettlebell falling on your foot. So the environment isn't like cold, it's fear in this sense.
Right.
And the only way you get out of the fear is by learning to trust the other person, and then also giving that person the best possible throw that you can back. And the person who developed this is a guy named Michael Castro Giovanni, and he says like he watches couples do this, like, you know, and you know, when you're in a relationship, you have all these unspoken things in the relationship that you're like, I don't want to talk about that. Let's talk about something else. And what the kettlebell throwing allows you to do is work on those trust issues without using any words. And it's been like this really fun practice that I've been doing, and it's fun to get like two like really muscly dudes, like two gorillas facing off against each other, and then have them throw the kettlebell and tell them, throw the kettlebell with love.
Well, that's an interesting question too, is like what happens in those sort of scenarios when you are with another person. And I think that's something that that's another thing we've lost practice with in our modern world. So that's, you know, I'm excited to read more about that when the Wedge does come out. When does it come out, by the way? I know we're getting ahead of ourselves. April
14th, but after this chat, send me your address and I'll just send a copy out to you.
That would be awesome, because I really want to read that.
Excellent.
So you said earlier that you've been practicing now for 10 years. Like looking back 10 years ago, how has this changed you, do you think?
It's made me a more physical person. Like I've always been cerebral. I've always had done adventures. Like I was, even though I was sort of out of shape and whatever, I was still in the middle of war zones doing stupid things. But I never really had much of a penchant for exercise or wanting to put myself in discomfort. And what has happened since then is I find myself going out and doing things, being like, I can do this. This will be okay. And not anticipating what my limits are beforehand. And I think that's been really good. The other thing that's been bizarre, and I didn't expect when I went into this, is I used to suffer from canker sores, which are big like this size sores, or they get bigger when you go near the camera. It's like up to the size of like a dime, like a white ulcer on the inside of my mouth. And I had them particularly bad, and I had them since I was about 0 years old. Don't know where they came from. Maybe it's herpes, maybe it's autoimmune, I don't know. And it would make it difficult to talk, and I would get them probably once a month, and they would last like 3 to 7 days. It sucked.
It sounds really uncomfortable. Yeah.
Yeah, it sucked. I thought of myself as like a canker sore survivor, which I know is sort of lame because there's people who have much more serious medical conditions, but this was mine. And
there's no sense in comparing
right.
pain, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
And so what happened, and totally unexpectedly, is they stopped coming after I started doing the method for like 2 weeks. And now what I've learned is that as I start to feel one coming on, like, you know, there's they call them prodromal symptoms, which means like the initial symptoms, the itchy, painy, whatever stuff.
Yeah.
I can sort of sense that coming on, and then I just redouble my breathing efforts for that week, and it never emerges. It never pops into the ulcer. And that has been, like, for me, life-changing, because it takes a week out of every month where I have back, where I'm not, like, you know, just sort of like just uncomfortable and in pain all the time. Like, and that's been cool. And this is why why I asked you, like, did you see IBS go away? Because a lot of people do see remission of autoimmune illnesses when they do, you know, do this regularly, and they keep up their practice. Like, if you stop doing practice, it comes back.
And there's so many factors and so many the wide variety of modern illnesses we have, you know. I definitely noticed like improvements in because anxiety and depression, all that plays into it. It's a very interesting like mental, physical combo deal you're getting there, where one makes the other one worse. So, but yeah, this is a good like motivation for me to get back on it, because I did it for so long. I think I was like, not so long, not as long as you, but from when I read your book, I started doing it, and then I think 4 or 5 months later, 4.5 months, when we went to Italy, and then I just fell off the wagon. So this is really good for me to get back on, because I did love it so much, and I actually missed it when we were in Italy. But it is a practice, it is a habit, like anything. It's something I think that's good to on and keep up.
That's the thing, is like with any of these things, I know I fall off it too sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty regular lately. You know, for the last few years, I've been, you know, I wake up in the morning and my wife and I do it together. So I'll wake up and I'll be like, I don't want to do the breathing. And she's like, we have to do the breathing. And so we sort of like goad each other into doing it.
That's good. Yeah.
And so rope your husband into it. And seriously, just do the breathing before you get out of bed.
That's what I used to do. Yeah, because it's too hard during the day to like find time. Yeah.
Totally. And then once you get off it, you're right. It is really hard to get back on that sort of breathing wagon, and because we're lame humans and we're like, we always want comfort, right?
Yeah, you compare yourself in the beginning of What Doesn't Kill Us to a jellyfish, which made me laugh so much, because you just like just float around, do whatever.
But yeah, I think it's really important to be pretty humble in this stuff, because I think that the Wim Hof method can look very macho. It can look like. Like, look at the cover of my book. Look at this. I mean, I love the cover of the book, but that dude, you don't identify with that dude, or I don't identify with that dude. And you know, there is this macho element out there. There are these people who are like, I can stay in the cold longer than you. Look how long I can hold my breath. I can hold my breath till I pee myself. I saw someone on Reddit say that the other day. I was like, that's bad, man.
Don't do it. That's not the point.
And it's ultimately about competing with yourself. It's like pushing where you are, and there should be this more sort of intuitive approach to this, because everyone has stress, and it shouldn't be about beating another person. Like, and this is what I get into in the Wedge a lot. It's like, look, you can write a book for the #1 athlete in the world, you know, but we're not the #1. There can only be not one #1, and there's the vast majority of us who are, you know, at various states of health, and we can all benefit from this too.
Yeah, I think that's really important to remember, and a great point as we slowly start wrapping this up, because it sounds like this crazy thing that, you know, only a certain type of person would do, but that's my dog making a groany comfort noise, but that only a certain type of person would do. But like, one of the major points is that lots of people do it, average people do it, and not to be intimidated by the idea of it, and like to read your book, because it is one of the best books on the method and just that idea in general at all. So, and it explains it in a scientific way, and it takes it through your experience, so it's good storytelling. It's entertaining to read. And with that being said, can you share a little bit about what's next for you?
You mean with the Wedge or after the Wedge?
Both. Let's do both. With the Wedge first.
All right. So the Wedge is it's really, it is what happens after the Wim Hof method. You've learned this thing, you've learned how to modulate your stress and cold and breathing. Now where can we take it? And what I write about here is that there are 3 places where we can insert the wedge, right? It's not just in the mind, right? It's you can actually move your place from one room to another, from one environment to another, and that alters your nervous system. Simply being in another place. So you go into a sauna, you go into ice water, that's going to trigger all sorts of neural responses. Another place you can insert the wedge is, if you think about where your mind is, like we think it's in our brain, and it sort of is in our brain.
Yeah.
But it's at the end of a lot of nerves, and it cannot sense the world outside of your nerves. Like there's no brain sense that I'm aware of that I can detect anything. It has to go through my eyes, it has to go through my fingers, it has to go through, my body in some way. So you can actually insert a wedge in the nerves that come to your brain. So the actual signal, the pain, for instance, you can change the signal before it gets to your brain. You can do this with breathing methods because it changes the pH, it changes the transmission of the signal, things like that. You can do it with psychedelics. You can do it with medications. You can do it with things that literally working on your hardware so that when that signal gets to your brain, you interpret the world in a different way.
Right.
And finally, the third way is once the signal has arrived in your brain, you can then change the way you interpret it. So you jump into ice water and you say, this is horrible and pain. Instead, I can say, no, this is the feeling of joy. This is the feeling of happiness and resilience. And that really fundamentally changes this experience. The other really amazing thing that I learned in the wedge is, and this is talking with some neuroscientists at Wayne State University, where and also at Stanford, Andrew Huberman, who has another great Instagram channel, is that when you first experience any sensation, anything at all, it comes in through your nerves, it goes into your brain stem, it goes up into into the lowest areas of your brain, and your body, let's say it's ice water, because ice water is very familiar, it comes in as signal. Like there's no meaning to that. It's just like, here's a really loud signal coming in, and there's a character to that signal. But if the brain has never felt ice water before, so let's say this is the first time you roll on the snow naked, this is the first time you do anything like that, it comes in and it goes into what the limbic system. And I like to think of the limbic system as a library. Okay. And at the head of the limbic system is of the limbic librarian, or Bex. It's the limbic Bex. And the limbic Bex is sitting there, and she gets this new signal. It's a book, or it's not a book, it's just the signal, and she's like, what's this? And she looks in through the whole library, and then limbic Bex discovers that she's never seen this before. So she sends this to the cataloging room, which is which is the paralimbic system. And in the paralimbic system, it's like, I got a new signal. And it looks at that signal and says, it pairs it with your current emotional state. And this is super important. So when you're in the ice water for the first time, your nerves there's actually some instinctual programs that will make this essentially feel like unmitigated terror and horror and fear of death, right?
Yeah.
And so it bonds unmitigated fear and horror and death to ice water and kicks it back down to limbic Bex. And limbic Bex says, great, I now know what that signal means, and she catalogs it. Now here's the super interesting thing. The next time that signal comes in, Bex takes the symbol off the shelf, says, okay, unmitigated terror, and sends it to the rest of the brain, and it doesn't go to the paralimbic system anymore, which means every time you experience any sensation, and remember the brain is a locked box, so everything is sensation originally, you are living in your emotional past. Unless,
it's like blowing my mind right now. It's making so much sense to me. It's not even funny. Like with anxiety in it, it's really interesting. Yeah.
And so then this is why when you walk down a street, Bex, I'm back.
You're back. Okay.
I reached my Instagram time limit for the day. I was like, what is that?
I turned mine off today because I was afraid it would do that. That's so funny. Okay. So
I thought it was like I thought Instagram told me I had to get off. I was like, wow, that's weird.
So we're walking down the street. And then
right, and then you smell like honeysuckle, right? And then you smell that honeysuckle, and then you remember your grandma when you used to like walk through fields with your grandma. And it's because that neural pathway was connected to the honeysuckle, and the last time you felt it, or at least the strongest time you felt it, it was back with grandma. And at the time, here, another interesting thing, at the time you were with your grandma, you may not even have noticed the honeysuckle. Yes. Sometimes the honeysuckle was just there, and then it becomes the trigger later, because we are making neural symbols all the time. Right now, I feel weirdly slightly chilly. I don't know. Maybe I'm just anxious talking to you. You know, there's a quality of light out here. There's air pressure. I'm at 52,000 feet, 5,200 feet right now. You know, there's all of these things happening at once, and all of those things form neural symbols. And what I learned in the Wedge is that you can create new ones by having a certain mindset when you apply a new stimulus.
That's interesting.
And by doing that, you actually affect how you will feel things in the future, because you're wiring that into your body, and it comes back over and over again. And so I have a bunch of ways to do that in this book, and then there's millions and millions and millions of other ways to do it as well. Like I picked 10, and there's like 50,000. So
it sounds amazing. I'm really interested. I can't wait to read it. I'll definitely be messaging you my address after this, because I'm super curious about it. But is there anything else you want to add before we hop off?
Yeah, if you guys want to see a sample chapter of the Wedge, go to my website, which is scottcarney.com, and then you sign up for my mailing list, and then I send you a chapter, and then you can unsubscribe if you don't want to get awesome emails from me in the future. Yeah, so go to scottcarney.com. I think it's in my Instagram profile as well.
I'll link to it too. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
And you know, I really just want people to, you know, the goal of this is to get people in touch with their bodies. The goal is to find ways that we are actually, you know, part of our environment, and not to be afraid of the environment, but to interact with it wisely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here, guys. I'm going to leave a link and a photo of What Doesn't Kill Us, and then I'll also link to your website so people can go there if they like. Otherwise, I had so much fun talking to you. It's weird because I feel like we've talked before, but we haven't.
Yeah, we haven't. No.
I guess emails a year ago when I reached out about this book.
I think about a year ago. Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy.
But I appreciate you. I appreciate you posting and keeping the word out, because that's why people read books these days. You know?
Yeah, well, it's my pleasure. Seriously, thank you for sending it. And thanks for agreeing to hop on with me today. I had a great time.
Anytime.
And I'll see you somewhere in the future.
We'll do it again.
Okay, awesome.
We're gonna, where do you live?
I live outside of D.C.
Oh.
In Virginia.
If I ever happen to be in D.C., we'll throw some kettlebells, and you'll look awesome.
Yeah, I'm so down.
All right.
All right, bye.
Bye. Thank you.